What if I told you that the marriage counselor who's supposed to save relationships was actually destroying them for profit? And what if that marriage counselor was your wife? This is David's story, a quiet architect who trusted his wife completely. Maya wasn't just cheating on him. She was running a twisted operation, using her therapy license to help wealthy women destroy their own marriages from inside. But David played the long game. And his revenge was so psychologically perfect, so absolutely devastating, that by the end, Maya was counseling her own downfall, without even knowing it. Stick around, because what David did next will make you question everything you think you know about trust, betrayal, and justice. This story has more twists than a pretzel factory. In the ending, chef's kiss. Maya thought she was playing chess while David was playing checkers. She was dead wrong. David was playing 4D chess, and he was already 3 moves ahead. Before we dive into how David turned the tables, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because stories like this aren't just rare, they're real. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Every evening at 6:47 p.m., Maya would walk through the front door of their cozy suburban home, her therapist's smile still perfectly in place. She'd hang up her blazer and sigh. Another day of saving marriages, to David, who would look up from his drafting table. For 5 years, this was their rhythm. David, the gentle architect, was genuinely proud of Maya, the marriage counselor. He loved the way she'd come home and tell him about breakthrough moments, stories that made him fall in love with her all over again, every single day. But then something shifted. It started small. Maya began mentioning a new case, a high-profile couple. "This could be the case that really establishes my reputation," she'd say. "These people have serious money, serious influence, and serious problems." The sessions with this mysterious couple started running later and later. First until 8 p.m., then 9, then past 10, even past midnight. Maya would text David, "Just wrapping up now?" This breakthrough work is absolutely incredible. David wasn't suspicious by nature. When your wife builds her career on fixing trust issues, you tend to trust her completely. So when Maya started coming home at 1 a.m., even 2 in the morning, David just assumed she was doing what she'd always done, helping people, being amazing at her job. But Maya was different when she came home from these late sessions. She was practically glowing, electric with excitement. She'd pace around their bedroom, talking rapidly about therapeutic breakthroughs. "David, you wouldn't believe the progress we're making," she'd say, her eyes bright in a way he hadn't seen since their honeymoon. "This is the kind of work that changes everything." The first real red flag? Maya's phone. This woman who used to leave her phone on the kitchen counter, who would hand it to David to check her messages, suddenly, her phone was locked tighter than Fort Knox. David noticed it on a Tuesday morning. Maya was making coffee, and her phone buzzed on the counter. David reached for it automatically, but instead of her usual wallpaper, he got a password screen. "Oh," he said, genuinely confused. "Your phone's locked." Maya turned around with a light, airy laugh that sounded rehearsed. "Client confidentiality has gotten much stricter lately," she said, stirring her coffee. "The state board is cracking down. We have to password protect everything now. You understand, right?" And David did understand. Of course he did. But a tiny voice whispered. In 5 years of marriage, Maya had never once mentioned the state board changing their confidentiality requirements. Then came the unsolicited marriage advice. During dinner one Thursday, Maya suddenly said, "You know, David, I'm learning that some couples need more excitement in their relationships." David paused, fork halfway to his mouth. "Okay, are we talking about us?" "Oh, no," Maya said quickly. "I just mean in general. People get comfortable, they fall into routines, and they stop exploring. They stop being curious about each other." The next week, it was, "I've been thinking about how some people can love 2 people at once." Not in a cheating way, she added hastily, but in a complex, emotional way. Love isn't always as simple as we think it is. Each comment felt like she was testing the water temperature, seeing how David would react. And David, sweet, trusting David, would just nod thoughtfully. But here's what David didn't say out loud. Maya had built her entire career on the foundation that love was simple, that trust was everything, that transparency was the cornerstone of lasting relationships. Now she was talking like a completely different person. 3 months into Maya's mysterious high-profile case, David started paying attention to details he'd never noticed before. The way Maya would shower immediately when she came home from these late sessions. The way she'd started buying new lingerie but never wore it around him. The way she got a haircut without mentioning it, shrugging. People notice when you look professional. Professional for whom? David wondered. Her clients were couples in crisis. Since when did marriage counseling require designer perfume and silk blouses? But the moment that really got David's attention, when that tiny whisper became a full voice, happened on a Saturday morning. Maya was in the shower, and her phone was buzzing incessantly on the nightstand. David wasn't trying to snoop. The thing was just so loud. Except now he couldn't check it. Because of that password. Because of client confidentiality. Because of state board requirements that David was becoming increasingly certain didn't actually exist. As he listened to Maya humming, David realized something that made his stomach drop. He couldn't remember the last time his wife had looked at him with genuine joy, genuine love, genuine presence. Maya was physically there every night, but emotionally, she was somewhere else entirely. With someone else entirely. The woman who'd built her career on saving marriages was about to destroy her own. And she was so confident, so certain that David would never figure it out, that she was practically giving him a roadmap to her deception. Maya thought she was being clever. She thought David was too trusting, too naive. She had no idea that David was an architect. And architects, they notice when foundations start to crack. The breaking point came on a Wednesday afternoon in March. David was working on blueprints when Maya burst through the front door. "David, amazing news," she announced, bouncing. "I've been selected for this exclusive weekend retreat for marriage counselors working with high-net-worth clients. 3 days in the mountains, intensive workshops, networking with the absolute best in the field." She pulled out a glossy brochure, the Cascadia Institute for Advanced Relationship Therapy. "David, this could change everything for my practice. Clients who pay 10 times my current rate." David smiled, genuinely happy. "That's incredible, Maya. When is it?" "This weekend. I know it's short notice, but someone dropped out last minute, and they offer me the spot." Maya was already mentally packing. David kissed her forehead. "I'm proud of you. You deserve this." But David's instincts were screaming. Maya's hands were shaking slightly. She wouldn't quite make eye contact. She immediately went upstairs to pack, even though the retreat wasn't until Friday. That night, after Maya had gone to bed, David found himself unable to sleep. He kept thinking about that brochure. It felt performative. So David went to their shared computer to look up the Cascadia Institute. The website looked professional enough, but when David clicked on upcoming events, his heart stopped. In bold red letters across the March retreat listing, "Canceled due to insufficient enrollment." He called the main number. An automated message confirmed. "Due to low registration numbers, all March programming has been canceled." David hung up and sat in the darkness, trying to process. Maya was lying to him, actively, elaborately lying about where she was going this weekend. The smart thing would have been to confront her. But David had spent months watching his wife transform, and he realized he needed the whole truth, not just Maya's version of it. Friday morning arrived with Maya in full performance mode. She packed her weekend bag with clothes David had never seen before, a black dress with tags, shoes not for hiking, and enough lingerie for a romantic getaway. "The retreat has some evening social events," Maya explained. David kissed her goodbye at 9 a.m., told her to drive safely, and watched her pull out of their driveway with a sick feeling. Then he got his own car and followed her. He stayed 3 cars back, his hands gripping the steering wheel. She didn't head toward the mountains. She didn't even leave the city. Instead, Maya drove to the Marriott downtown, parked in the garage, and walked into the lobby like she owned the place. David parked across the street and waited for 2 hours. Then, at exactly 1:30 p.m., David saw something that made his world tilt sideways. Maya walked out of the hotel lobby, but she wasn't alone. She was with a woman David had never seen before, tall, elegant, with long dark hair and a designer outfit. The two women were walking close together, too close for strangers, too intimate for professional colleagues. And this woman, this mysterious woman, had her hand on Maya's lower back as they walked toward the parking garage. David's first thought was surprisingly calm. Oh, Maya's having an affair with a woman. His second thought was less calm. Who the hell is this person? David followed them to a small cafe on the other side of town. Through the window, David watched Maya and this woman lean across their table, talking intensely. Maya was animated, gesturing. The other woman listened, writing in a small notebook. This wasn't romance. This was business. After 45 minutes, they left the cafe and got into the woman's sleek black BMW. David followed them to a massive colonial house in a residential neighborhood. They sat in the car for almost an hour, looking at something on a tablet. Then the woman reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope, thick with cash. She handed it to Maya. Maya opened it, counted what was inside, nodded, and tucked it into her own bag. David felt like he was watching a drug deal, except his wife was the dealer and information was the product. That night, David couldn't sleep. He kept replaying what he'd seen. Maya came home Sunday evening with stories about the retreat, glowing. She made love to David with a passion he hadn't felt from her in months. But David couldn't stop thinking about that envelope, about the way Maya had counted the money like she was used to receiving it. Monday morning, while Maya was at work, David did something he'd never done before. He searched through her things. Methodically, like he was solving a puzzle. In Maya's home office, tucked behind professional journals, David found a folder labeled Private Practice Development. Inside were bank statements for an account David didn't know existed. An account with regular deposits, always in round numbers, $5,000, $10,000, $15,000. And there were photos. Printed photos of people David didn't recognize, with handwritten notes in Maya's neat handwriting. Their fears, insecurities, marriage problems. One photo made David's blood run cold. It was the woman from the BMW, but in this picture, she was standing next to a man David recognized. A man Maya had mentioned before, Carlos Martinez, one of Maya's clients. A wealthy businessman going through a difficult divorce. David stared at the photo, and suddenly everything clicked into place. The woman Maya was meeting wasn't just her lover. She was Elena Martinez, Carlos's wife, the woman who was paying Maya to destroy her own husband's life. Maya wasn't just cheating on David. She was using her position as a marriage counselor to systematically destroy her clients' lives from the inside. She was feeding their deepest secrets, their greatest vulnerabilities, their most private fears to their spouses for money. David sat in Maya's office, surrounded by evidence of her betrayal, and realized that his wife wasn't just unfaithful. She was a predator. She was using people's trust, their desperation to save their marriages, to line her own pockets while destroying their lives. The woman he'd loved for 5 years, the woman he'd thought was dedicated to helping people heal, was actually professional emotional terrorism. And David realized something else. Maya was so confident in her deception, so certain that gentle, trusting David would never figure out her scheme, that she'd gotten careless. She'd left evidence everywhere. She'd practically documented her own crimes. Maya thought David was too naive to connect the dots. She was about to learn that architects don't just notice when foundations crack. They also know exactly how to bring the whole structure down. David didn't sleep for 3 days after discovering Maya's operation. He'd lie in bed next to his wife, wondering how many other families she destroyed. But David wasn't planning some dramatic confrontation. Maya was a professional manipulator. If David came at her directly, she'd find a way to turn it around, make him feel guilty for not trusting her, convince him he was misunderstanding the situation. No, David needed something different. Something that would force Maya to understand exactly what she'd been doing, not just to her clients, but to him. The idea came to him while he was reviewing blueprints for a client's home renovation. Sometimes the best way to show someone a structural problem isn't to point it out directly. You have to make them walk through the space and feel how wrong it is themselves. David started small. He began researching Maya's professional network, reading reviews of her practice, studying how she marketed herself. Maya positioned herself as a specialist in trust issues and marital transparency. The irony was almost too perfect. It took David 2 weeks to work up the courage for what came next. 2 weeks of normal dinners and conversations while he planned something that felt completely insane. But every time he wavered, he'd think about Carlos, about the other husbands whose deepest secrets Maya had sold to their wives. David called Maya's office on a Tuesday morning, using a voice he'd practiced in his car during lunch breaks. Not dramatically different from his own voice, just slightly higher, with a hint of nervousness that felt authentic. "I'd like to schedule a consultation with Dr. Rodriguez," he told the receptionist. "I'm having some trust issues in my marriage." The receptionist was kind and professional. "Dr. Rodriguez has availability Thursday at 3 p.m. Can I get your name?" "Michael Thompson," David said, using a name he'd chosen specifically because it was forgettable. David spent Wednesday evening at his office, practicing his story in front of a mirror. He focused on small changes. Glasses instead of contacts, his hair combed differently, clothes that were slightly more formal. Nothing dramatic, just enough to create distance between David the husband and Michael the client. Thursday afternoon, David sat in his car outside Maya's building, fighting every instinct that told him this was a terrible idea. But when he thought about the envelope full of cash he'd seen Elena hand to Maya, when he remembered those files full of stolen secrets, David knew he had to go through with it. Maya's office felt different when you were sitting in the client chair. David realized his wife had created the perfect environment for emotional manipulation. "Michael, I'm Dr. Rodriguez. Please, have a seat and tell me what's brought you here today." David looked at Maya, really looked at her, and felt a strange disconnect. This was his wife, but she was also a complete stranger. The professional warmth in her voice, the way she held her pen, the careful attention she paid to his body language, it was all performance. "My wife has been acting differently lately," David began, sticking as close to the truth as possible. "We've been together for 6 years, and she's always been completely open with me. But recently, things have changed." Maya nodded encouragingly. "What kind of changes have you noticed?" "She's working later than usual. Sometimes she doesn't come home until after midnight. When I ask about it, she says she has a demanding case that requires extra attention." David watched Maya's face, looking for any flicker of recognition. "She's also started password protecting her phone. When I mentioned it, she said new regulations require better security." David saw Maya's pen hesitate for just a moment. Not enough for most people to notice, but David had been watching Maya write for years. He knew her habits. "I keep telling myself I'm being paranoid," David continued, "but she's also started giving me relationship advice. Out of nowhere, she'll say things like some couples need more independence, or people can care about more than one person at once." This time, Maya did look up from her notes. Their eyes met for a split second, and David saw something flicker across her face. Not recognition exactly, but unease. "These concerns sound very valid, Michael. Trust is fundamental to any healthy relationship." Maya's voice was steady, professional, but David caught the slight tension in her shoulders. "Have you considered talking to your wife directly about these changes?" "I've tried, but she deflects. Makes me feel like I'm being possessive." David leaned forward. "Dr. Rodriguez, what would you do if you suspected your spouse was hiding something significant from you?" Maya set down her pen and looked at David directly. "I'd gather information before making any accusations. If someone is being deceptive, confronting them without evidence usually just makes them better at hiding their behavior." David nodded thoughtfully. "So you'd recommend investigating?" "Documenting patterns, yes. Paying attention to inconsistencies in their stories. If you suspect infidelity or deception, you owe it to yourself to know the truth." Maya was warming to the topic. "There are ways to verify someone's claims without violating their privacy. Check public records, look for gaps in their schedule, notice changes in their spending habits." David left that first session with a notebook full of Maya's advice on how to catch a deceptive spouse. Advice that his own wife had given him, without realizing she was describing her own behavior. Over the next month, David had 3 more sessions with Maya. Each time, he reported back on his investigation into his wife's suspicious behavior. He told Maya about finding unexplained cash deposits, about discovering his wife was meeting with people she claimed not to know, about realizing she was lying about her schedule. And Maya was invested. Completely, professionally invested in helping Michael Thompson expose his wife's deception. Your wife sounds like she's engaged in systematic dishonesty, Maya told him during their 3rd session. This isn't just about keeping work confidential. She's actively creating false narratives and manipulating your perception of reality. What kind of person does that? David asked. Maya was quiet for a long moment. Someone who's convinced themselves their actions are justified. Someone who believes they're protecting themselves or others by maintaining these lies. But ultimately, someone who's lost sight of basic ethical boundaries. During their 4th and final session, David looked across at Maya and marveled at how completely she was absorbed in solving his fictional problem. She had no idea she was counseling her own husband through the exact situation she'd created. I've decided to confront my wife this weekend, David told her. I have enough evidence now to have a real conversation about what's been happening. Maya leaned forward. How are you planning to approach it? Directly. Calmly. I'm going to tell her what I know and give her a chance to explain. David paused. And if she lies to me again, I'm going to show her exactly how much I've discovered about her secret activities. Something in David's tone must have registered because Maya's professional composure slipped slightly. She was looking at him more carefully now, like she was seeing him for the first time. Michael, she said slowly, may I ask what your wife does for work? David smiled, and for the first time in 4 sessions, he used his real voice. She's a marriage counselor, Maya. She helps people work through trust issues. The color drained from Maya's face as David pulled off his glasses and looked at her with a month's worth of carefully controlled anger. Hello, sweetheart. I think we need to talk. I know about the bank account with the cash deposits. I know about the psychological profiles you've been selling. I know about the 3 marriages you've helped destroy for profit. David's voice was calm, steady, but there was steel underneath it. Maya's professional composure was cracking. I'm not sure what you're talking about. Those names don't mean anything to me. Dr. Rodriguez, David said quietly, may I ask you something? In all your years of practice, have you ever encountered a marriage counselor who uses client confidentiality to commit fraud? Someone who takes money to destroy the very relationships they're supposed to heal. Maya was staring at him now, really looking at him for the first time in 4 sessions. Michael, I think there might be some confusion. There's no confusion, Maya. David pulled off his glasses and looked at his wife with a month's worth of carefully controlled fury. Hello, sweetheart. Surprise. Maya's face went through about 12 different expressions in 3 seconds. Shock, recognition, fear, anger, and then something that looked almost like respect for how thoroughly she'd been played. David, her voice was barely a whisper. 4 sessions, Maya. 4 sessions where you coached me on how to catch my cheating wife. You gave me advice on documenting deception, gathering evidence, and exposing systematic dishonesty. You were so helpful, so thorough, so completely invested in helping me understand exactly what kind of person would do what you've been doing. Maya was gripping the arms of her chair, her knuckles white. David, I can explain. Oh, I know you can explain. You're very good at explanations. Very good at making people believe whatever story serves your purposes. David stood up slowly. But here's the thing, Maya. I don't need your explanations anymore. I have recordings of you teaching me how to expose you. I have evidence of your entire operation. And I have 3 very angry husbands who are very interested in making sure you never practice therapy again. Maya stood up abruptly, her professional mask completely gone now. You've been planning this. You've been lying to me for weeks. Ironic, isn't it? David smiled, but there was no warmth in it. The woman who built her career on trust issues doesn't like being deceived. Maya was already moving toward her desk, probably thinking about damage control, about calling Elena, about destroying evidence. But David was done playing games. I wouldn't bother calling Elena, he said casually. She's a bit busy right now dealing with Carlos's divorce attorney. Turns out when you provide someone's husband with recordings of his wife planning to financially destroy him, the legal proceedings get very interesting very quickly. Maya froze. What have you done? What you taught me to do, sweetheart. I gathered evidence. I documented patterns of deception. I helped people protect themselves from systematic manipulation. David walked toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Maya, you might want to clear your schedule for the next few months. The state licensing board is very interested in reviewing your recent therapeutic practices. David opened the door, then looked back at his wife one more time. Maya was standing behind her desk, looking smaller than he'd ever seen her, the weight of her collapsed schemes finally settling on her shoulders. I'll see you home, Maya. We have a lot to discuss. And this time, I'll be asking the questions. Maya rushed home that evening in full panic mode. She was calling Elena, Victoria, Rebecca, trying to coordinate damage control for an operation that was already completely exposed. She was thinking about evidence to destroy, stories to coordinate, ways to minimize the legal consequences. What Maya didn't expect was to walk into a house that had been transformed into a documentary film set. David had spent the afternoon setting up cameras in their living room, kitchen, and hallway. Not hidden cameras, obvious ones. Professional equipment that made it clear this conversation was going to be recorded, preserved, and probably used in legal proceedings. When Maya's key turned in the front door, David was sitting calmly at their kitchen table, wearing his normal clothes, his normal glasses, looking like the David she'd been married to for 5 years. Except for the stack of printed photographs spread across the table. The bank statements, the transcripts of recorded phone calls, the evidence of 4 years of systematic fraud laid out like a timeline of betrayal. Maya stood in the doorway, looking at the cameras, looking at the evidence, looking at her husband who had somehow become someone she didn't recognize. "Hello, Maya," David said quietly, gesturing to the chair across from him. "I think we need to have a session." Maya stood frozen in her own kitchen, staring at the evidence of her crimes spread across the table like a patient's file. But this time, she was the subject being analyzed. "Sit down, Maya," David said, his voice carrying the same calm authority she used with her clients. "We're going to have the most important therapy session of your career." Maya didn't move. She couldn't. The cameras were rolling. The evidence was undeniable. And her husband, her quiet, trusting, supposedly naive husband, had just demonstrated a level of psychological manipulation that rivaled her own. "David, we can work this out," she began, falling back on her professional training. "Couples can overcome." "Maya," David's voice cut through her deflection like a scalpel. "Sit down." She sat. David picked up one of the photographs from the table, the one of Maya and Elena exchanging money outside the cafe. "Let's start with basic honesty. Do you know what this is?" Maya's mouth opened, closed, opened again. For the first time in her professional life, she had no words. "This is you accepting payment for destroying Carlos Martinez's mental health. A man who came to you for help saving his marriage. A man who trusted you with his deepest fears, his childhood trauma, his desperate hope that he could learn to love better." David set the photo down gently. "You took that trust, Maya, and you sold it to his wife for $15,000. Maya found her voice, but it came out as a whisper. "How long have you known?" "For months. For months of watching you come home, energized from destroying people's lives. For months of listening to you talk about your breakthrough work, while you systematically tortured men who were paying you to help them." David picked up another document, a bank statement. "Victoria Chun paid you $12,000 to exploit James's relationship anxiety. You gave her a step-by-step guide on how to trigger his abandonment issues while documenting his reactions for her divorce attorney." Then another photo. Rebecca Walsh. $10,000 to weaponize Tom's trust issues against him. You didn't just help her cheat him out of his restaurants, Maya. You helped her convince him he was losing his mind. Maya was crying now, not the pretty tears of remorse, but the ugly, desperate crying of someone whose entire world was collapsing. "David, please." "Please what? Please forgive you? Please understand that you had good reasons for destroying innocent people." David's voice remained perfectly calm, which somehow made it more terrifying. "Maya, Do you know what all three of those men had in common? She shook her head. They reminded me of myself. Quiet men who worked hard, who trusted completely, who never imagined their wives could be capable of systematic cruelty. David leaned forward. Carlos designs children's playgrounds. James builds apps that help people with anxiety. Tom donates meals to homeless shelters every Christmas. These weren't bad men, Maya. They were good men whose only crime was loving women who saw their kindness as weakness. Maya was sobbing now. I never meant for it to go this far. It started with just Elena, and she was so unhappy, and Carlos was so controlling. Stop. David's voice was sharp. Do not make excuses. Do not rationalize. Do not lie to me anymore. He pulled out a digital recorder and placed it on the table. This contains 4 hours of you coaching me on how to expose systematic deception in marriage. For hours of you teaching me, without knowing it, how to dismantle your entire operation. Maya stared at the recorder like it was a weapon pointed at her heart. You want to know the beautiful part, Maya? You were so good at it. So thorough. You taught me to document everything, to look for financial inconsistencies, to notice changes in routine and behavior. You gave me a masterclass in catching a spouse who's living a double life. David pressed play on the recorder. Maya's own voice filled the kitchen. If you suspect systematic dishonesty, you need to gather evidence methodically. Look for patterns, document financial transactions, and always assume the deception goes deeper than what you can see on the surface. David stopped the recording. That's you, Maya. Teaching me how to catch you. Maya looked up at David through her tears, and for the first time, she seemed to really see him. Not as her husband, not as her Mark, but as someone who had spent months studying her, understanding her, and systematically dismantling everything she'd built. What happens now? She whispered. David pulled out a thick manila folder. Now you learn what accountability looks like. He opened the folder and began laying out documents like he was presenting a case study. I've reported you to the state licensing board with evidence of fraudulent practice and violation of client confidentiality. Your license will be revoked within the week. Another document. I provided Carlos, James, and Tom with evidence of their wives' schemes. All 3 divorce proceedings have been halted while criminal fraud charges are being considered. Another document. I've contacted your malpractice insurance company. They're very interested in the claims that will be filed against you. Another document. And I filed for divorce, Maya, with evidence of adultery, fraud, and emotional abuse. Maya was hyperventilating now. David, please, I'll make this right. I'll pay them back. You'll what? You'll give back Carlos's mental health? You'll undo the psychological damage you did to James? You'll restore Tom's ability to trust another human being? David's voice was getting louder now, the careful control finally cracking. Maya, you didn't just steal money. You stole people's capacity for love. You destroyed their ability to believe in human goodness. That's not something you can pay back. David stood up and walked to the window. Do you know what the worst part is? It's not that you cheated on me. It's not even that you stole from vulnerable people. It's that you made me complicit. Maya looked up at him, confused. Every night when you came home glowing from your breakthrough work, I was proud of you. Every time you told me about helping people save their marriages, I fell in love with you all over again. You made me celebrate your cruelty, Maya. You made me an accessory to emotional terrorism. David turned back to face her. But you know what? You also taught me something valuable. You taught me that some people can't be saved. Some people are so fundamentally broken that they'll turn even love into a weapon. Maya was quiet now, the tears still flowing, but the desperate pleading stopped. She was finally understanding the scope of what she'd lost. I'm leaving tonight, David said simply. The house is yours until the divorce is finalized. Then it'll be sold to help pay your legal fees. Your belongings will be packed and waiting for you. He walked toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Maya, Elena, Victoria, and Rebecca all turned on each other the moment they realized they were caught. Elena's trying to claim you manipulated her into the scheme. Victoria's saying she was blackmailed. Rebecca's blaming everything on your professional influence. Maya looked up sharply. What? Turns out, Maya When you teach people to betray trust for money, they don't suddenly become loyal when the money stops coming. David smiled, but it wasn't cruel. It was almost sad. You built your operation on the idea that people are fundamentally selfish and dishonest. Congratulations. You were right. David walked to the front door, then turned back one final time. The cameras will keep recording until tomorrow morning. Feel free to say whatever you need to say. Consider it your final therapy session. He left Maya sitting at their kitchen table, surrounded by the evidence of her crimes, finally understanding what it felt like to be professionally, personally, and completely destroyed by someone who knew her better than she knew herself. But David's revenge wasn't finished, because 3 months later, Maya would discover that David had done something even more devastating than exposing her crimes. He'd forgiven her victims, and he'd helped them heal. David moved to a small mountain town where he opened a legitimate counseling practice specializing in helping men recover from emotional manipulation and divorce trauma. His first 3 clients? Carlos, James, and Tom. The sign outside his office read, "Mountain View Recovery Counseling, Rebuilding Trust After Betrayal." And his tagline? "Sometimes the best therapy is the truth." 6 months after Maya's license was revoked, David received a letter at his new practice. It was from Carlos Martinez. "Dr. David, I wanted you to know that I'm dating again. For the first time since my marriage ended, I believe I can trust someone. Thank you for showing me what real help looks like." Maya, meanwhile, was working at a grocery store in the city, her reputation destroyed, her career over, her marriage ended. She'd see articles about David's new practice sometimes, featured in magazines about innovative therapy techniques and healing after betrayal. And Maya would realize that even in his revenge, David had maintained his integrity. He hadn't become like her. He'd become better. He'd taken the wreckage she'd created and turned it into something that actually helped people heal. Maya thought she was playing chess while David was playing checkers. She was wrong. David was playing chess too. He was just playing for keeps. What did you think of David's revenge? Was it too harsh, or exactly what Maya deserved? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this twisted tale, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because I've got more stories that'll make you question everything you think you know about trust, betrayal, and justice. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.